I live in a town where you can still hear church bells chime on a Sunday morning, where families gather with pride to watch their children grow like flowers in the sun. We honor the brave who sacrificed for our country and those who continue to serve and protect us. In the spirit of love, belonging, and acceptance, this program was created. I'm Marie Wyman, and welcome to Close to Home. More than 1,000 people died last year, and in the first 3 months of 2015, there were 312 confirmed fatal opiate overdoses in Massachusetts. On today's show, we will discuss the rise in opiate use in our community and what is being done to help. Hi, I'm Marie Wyman, and today we have with us two of Northborough's finest. Police Chief Mark Leahy, who in his 12th year as head of the Northborough Police Department. He was formerly the Chief of Police in Suffield, Connecticut, and Captain of the Connecticut State Police. Also with us is Detective Sergeant Brian Griffin, a Northborough native who has been on the Northborough Police Force for 15 years. He has served as a patrol officer, dare officer, detective school resource officer, and for the past 7 years, he has served as the sergeant in charge of the Detective Bureau. Detective Sergeant Griffin is a member of the Worcester County Regional Drug Task Force, as well as one of the coordinators of the Worcester County Breaking and Entering Task Force. Welcome, gentlemen, today to Close to Home.
Thank you, Marie.
We have a lot of different questions to ask the Chief and Brian, but one of the things that we'd like to discuss first of all is the growing number of opiate problems in our area alone, including Worcester. I know you and I, Chief, discussed earlier that the misuse of drugs stems back probably to the use of pain management and that sort of thing. But in regards to overdoses in our area, we're just the same. If, you know, we're close to Worcester, but we're the same. We do have the same kind of issues here, don't we?
Yeah, we certainly do. I think, you know, the one message that we want to get out above all is that Northborough continues to be a beautiful, safe place to live. That said, we're not immune from the problems that plague some larger communities nearby. And that's been the case with the opioid addiction and overdose problems, is that our proximity to larger communities, and I'm not going to point one of them out, larger communities that are nearby, makes many of these things available to people. And that's been the case in our experience when it comes to not just opioids, but the wide-ranging scale of all narcotics and illegal drugs.
In general.
We're not immune.
We're not immune. Just because we live in a town that has, you know, a reputation for being kind of like a sleepy little town with, you know, a lot of amenities and a safe place, we still have to realize that these issues affect us all.
Correct.
No matter if they're in Worcester or if they're in Boston, they still affect us. And our young people are especially, we're especially concerned with our young people today. I know we have a lot of tools to combat the misinformation to young people and how they get sort of like hooked on drugs innocently enough. Let's talk about the program DARE, the tools for young people that we have. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Detective?
Sure. We currently we have 5 DARE officers that our department puts into the different public schools in Northborough, the elementary schools. We also do St. Bernadette's, so every single school in Northborough, every elementary school has a different DARE officer, which is nice. Not only does it do we have an opportunity to reach out and connect with the fifth graders and share a very important message, but you're really forming a relationship that often follows them throughout their high school years. They typically remember their DARE officer, and we hope they remember the message that we relay to them in the fifth grade, but at the very least, there's a connection there, which I think is very critical. So we continued with the DARE program in the fifth grade. And then when they get up to the high school, we offer a lot of programs where either myself or one of our detectives will go in and speak at various health classes, for instance, educating them about the various narcotics and alcohol, the situations they might get in that are out there.
Can either one of you address the kind of breakdown in the level of drugs that we have available in the area? I know heroin is becoming a big problem down in the Cape and Gloucester area, and can you kind of break that down for us and tell us the difference between, I don't know, what we call like a hard drug, or I know the OxyContin is prescribed by physicians for pain, and I know that can be abused. As I was telling you, Chief, just before we started, I was reading an article recently, just came out in AARP, where they discussed that very thing, how unfortunately an older woman who had disease of the spine was prescribed the opiate OxyContin, and she became addicted to it. And here is a person who is taking her doctor's advice and doing the steps that need to be done to manage her chronic pain. Now, you know, tell us how you feel the heroin and the OxyContin and drugs that kind of come through on a prescription basis. How is that working into this whole problem that we have?
So before we do that, can I just kind of double back to DARE
Sure,
for
go
one
right ahead.
second? And then that's one of the important things where I'm really happy to have Brian with us today, because when it comes to what we're seeing on the streets in Northborough, that is absolutely his bailiwick and the work of our detective unit and everybody in patrol. But just before we leave DARE, one of the beauties about DARE is the fact that it's provided in the fifth grade. It's that final step before the kids move on to the middle school, where a lot of things change. You know, all of a sudden you're leaving that environment in the comfort of the elementary school.
And you're going to get the peer pressure, is what you're saying.
And that's, thank you, that's exactly where one of the most important things about DARE, and look, there are people that think that DARE walks on water. There are people that think that we have no business being in the school with DARE. That's okay. I'm open to everybody's point of view on that. What I like about DARE, first of all, we're not teachers. We don't go there and pretend to be teachers, but we do deal with real life, and we deal with the tragedy that goes along with this type of a lifestyle. And so the goal is really to help kids avoid that. Almost all of us are parents. Some of us are grandparents. And inside the police department. And you see things and you know that you don't want these things for your kids or for your grandkids. No one does, you know, as we go along. Exactly. And it's tragic. But one of the important lessons that DARE teaches kids is how to deal with peer pressure.
Right.
You know, there are a lot of things. It's not just beating a drum about just say no. There's so much more to DARE about that at a very impressionable age, that we try to give them some tools in the toolbox that they can use when the time comes that they're faced with one of these problems.
For instance, what are some of the things that
we got a resident expert.
Yeah,
we're blessed. Some towns just have one DARE officer. We have, I think, 6.
That's wonderful.
In our department,
I was unaware of that.
We have a large
I'm
group
glad
of
our
really
audience
committed
is listening
people.
to this, because I think that's important for the middle school children as well as the children that are going on to high school, the young teens, that there are people out there that really care about what happens to them and want to keep them safe. As you said, Chief, we want to keep our children safe. And this is part of the reason why we wanted to do this program today, to alert people of what we have in place as tools. Now, not to interrupt you, Chief, but is it okay if we just kind of go back to DARE? We're kind of stuck on DARE, but we really need to get this out. What are some of the tools that you have in place, Detective, that help the young people understand the gravity of the situation?
Well, I think, like the chief was saying about the peer pressure, for instance, we give them the tools, the strategies, the tips to avoid it. With the negative peer pressure, we talk about negative peer pressure and positive peer pressure, how there are certain situations where peer pressure can be good. For instance, hey, come out and study, come out and throw the ball around with me. I really want to make the baseball team, you know.
Right.
And the kid goes, no, I don't want to do that. Yeah, come on out, come on out. No, it'll be good for you. That's a positive situation, going out
Right.
and doing something like that. Or you really should go to the library with me today to study for that test. Those are positive situations.
That's a good moral compass right there.
Indeed.
You've got a good handle on that,
Right.
because we want to teach our kids that there is kind of the right way to approach a bad subject, and you know, the wrong way to approach it.
And then
So
obviously
that's-
the wrong way, or the negative peer
Right.
pressure, we talk about that and what that sounds like, what it looks like, and how they might experience it. You know, one of the biggest tips that I give them is to avoid the situation altogether.
Entirely. Right. Don't
And
put
that's
yourself
huge.
in there.
Don't put your situation, don't be afraid to communicate with mom and dad. And that's something I even stress with the high school kids, because I think that communication, as they get older, the communication starts to break down, right?
Right.
Especially
Right.
7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, and then
I've
so on.
heard
It
that
goes down.
so
So
much.
that communication breaks down, and I think that they really need that support, whether it's the parental support, which hopefully they have at home, or a close friend that they can trust and communicate with. I think that communication is big.
Now, another question, when we talked about, you know, the heroin and the OxyContin and that sort of thing, how prevalent do you think, you know, for younger people especially, is it the lack of education as to what these drugs do to them that gets them in trouble? Is it just because they don't know the effects of a drug long term or even short term? Is that am I hearing that, or is it just a much more complicated issue, do you think?
Well, I think when you referenced that article, I think with the heroin, for instance, it's the addiction. It's getting stuck on a painkiller and that not being enough, or the prescription runs out for your OxyContins and you need to get a fix.
Right.
So I think that's the whole addiction. But going back to the younger population, the early high school years, and when I do talk in health classes, I ask the kids, what are the 3 most popular drugs that you see in this area? And we start off with alcohol. We talk about alcohol a lot.
Exactly.
Alcohol would be your number 1. Marijuana would be number 2. And then the third one, when I asked this question last year, every class I asked, they brought it up. I didn't have any stats to support it, but they all said prescription pills, specifically Adderall. So a lot of the younger kids, high school age, are starting with Adderall. Why is that? Because I think a lot of kids have access to it. A lot of kids today are prescribed it more than ever before.
Is that right?
And they see it as being okay, acceptable a little bit. Now, we talk about that, how if you have a prescription for Adderall to help you with ADHD and concentration, that's okay, because your doctor has prescribed it, your parents give it to you, or the school nurse gives it to you, and that's okay. The problem we're seeing is those individuals with a prescription giving them to their friends and abusing them the wrong way, using them and abusing them the wrong way, whether they're snorting it. And then that opens up another whole avenue of criminal mischief. When somebody gives somebody their Adderall, that's a drug deal. I mean, you can't do that.
Right, exactly.
You cannot do that. So they're not, they're experimenting with the alcohol, the marijuana, which is nothing new. We've always dealt with that. The scary thing is when we're introducing prescription pills, that's where I'm starting to see a little bit of a concern, even in our community.
Wow, I was unaware of that. That's really an eye-opener. Go ahead.
Well, you figure the prevalent use of painkillers nowadays, so many folks have painkillers that are in their medicine cabinet.
Yeah.
And whenever the medical event has passed, a lot of times folks don't get rid of the medication that they no longer need.
Right.
One of the things that we've done for the last several years, and it's going to be coming up again in a couple of weeks, is we always participate in National Drug Take-Back Day.
That's one of my questions, yeah, I had that down.
This year it's Saturday, September 26th, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. at the Northborough Police Department, 211 Main Street, Route 20. And this is a great way to get rid of all your medications.
Wonderful.
The Drug Enforcement Administration tries to avoid having these medications wind up in landfills because there is a cumulative effect of all this stuff leaching into the ground and so forth. But it's a great way to get rid of medications that you no longer have a need for, which may prove to be a temptation for someone else.
Abuse, exactly.
Right.
That's a very good point, Chief. And I know that's part of the tools that we have in place to deal with the problem of abuse. And I know for a fact that when we were younger, the strongest thing that we took was an aspirin. I mean, in terms of the development of drugs today and all the labs that are working on such a high number of different types of drugs, I think that opens kind of a Pandora's box for the problem of them coming to the street level and people abusing that, that particular drug or a myriad of drugs, as it were. As like in the 1990s, we were talking about this before the show, the drug companies, were giving doctors the kind of a carte blanche on how to prescribe the opiates, the OxyContin and certain other drugs to treat chronic pain. Sure. And through that process, we didn't really exactly know kind of like the long-term effects, like some of the things that happen in our universe that happens later. You find out what is the negativity about that, what's negative about it. But there again, we can't put the blame entirely on the drug companies. Obviously, there's much more at stake than just putting the blame on them. But that's a big part of it, because there's technology has come forward, and we've got all the drugs that we didn't have 50 years ago, or even 50, 60 years ago. So unfortunately, that is a problem. The other thing we wanted to talk about too, Chief, and I'm glad you brought that up, was another way that we can help with people that unfortunately have overdosed is something called Narcan, Narcan, and it's naloxone, right?
Yes.
Give us some information about that and who administers it, and we can talk about the cost and all that other stuff that goes along with it. Tell us about that, Chief.
Narcan is not new. It's actually been around for a long time. It's just that the recent crisis has really focused a lot of attention on the use of Narcan. Our paramedics and EMTs, hospitals have utilized Narcan for years to overcome the effects of the opioid overdose. It's gotten to the point now where we recognize that this is a life-saving tool. And we've actually now begun carrying it in our cruisers here in Northborough as well.
That's terrific.
Now, we've been fortunate in a way. I had a conversation with the Northborough Fire Department just to get a count of how many overdoses they've treated. Just looking over the last 12 months. We've had 8 here in the last 12 months. Now, when you view that in comparison to what larger communities are dealing with, it's a very small number. But regardless, there were 8 people in our community that were in crisis that needed the availability of Narcan immediately. Now, we're also blessed to have a wonderful emergency medical system here in the town of Northborough. I've made the comment a lot of times over the years that if something medically bad is going to happen to you, this is where you want it to happen. We have highly trained paramedics that are on duty 24 hours a day in the fire department. We have ambulances that are more like mobile operating rooms. It's just incredible what's available. I started doing this 39 years ago, and I can tell you that, when I look at how far we've come in 39 years with the availability of emergency medical services.
And the defibrillators and
incredible.
all that kind of stuff.
And we've had defibrillators now in the cars since 2008. That was a gift from the owners of Nicholas Michael Spa, who, after they had a devastating fire there in 2008, they did a fundraiser for the police department and the fire department, and we used 100% of the funds they gave us to put defibrillators in all of our cars.
Wonderful, yeah.
And this was the next logical step for us, was to, again, become another community that's carrying Narcan and having it available. Typically, when we have an emergency medical call, and we deal with over 900 of them a year that we go to, and basically anytime the fire department goes to a medical call or to a fire, we always go along, because there are there are situations there that can impact us as well. And you need to be able to react quickly. And typically when there's a medical call, we arrive and the paramedics arrive maybe within 30 seconds of one another.
Simultaneously almost.
But recently we had a case at a motel in town where we had a gentleman who was in crisis in an opioid overdose, and both of our ambulances from town were out on calls. They were already out on medical calls, so now we had to wait for a mutual aid ambulance to come from another community. And so it hadn't been a priority for us because our paramedics are always right there. They're right there with us, except when they're already tied up on helping other people.
Exactly.
So it made sense for us to make the move and go ahead and do this and
Seeing
logical step.
that the fire department is equipped with this kind of.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah, and would you mind showing us what it looks like, Chief?
I'll let Brian
This is right out of the box.
give you the
Right
tour.
out of the box. And we need to talk about, obviously, that this stuff doesn't come cheap either, does it?
Well, and that's been a problem, but fortunately it's a problem that has been addressed just as recently as last week. If you go back over the last 7 years, the price of Narcan, because we actually have to have a prescription.
Exactly.
It's an interesting process to be able to purchase it.
It's
It has-
regulated.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It's almost quadrupled
Wow.
in the last 7
Yeah,
years
I think
or
you
so.
gave me some statistical
Yes.
analysis about
It's-
that,
it's
and
amazing.
that just blew my mind. Because let me just interrupt you
Sure,
just
no
for a
problem.
second, Brian. In the beginning, we're talking about 2007 now.
Right.
It was $22.98 for 2 doses and 2 atomizers. Is that what I'm
Right.
hearing? And then, okay, fast forward to May of 2015. This is really hard to believe. The price per kit, which we're talking about is 2 doses and 2 atomizers, went up to $74.06. That just was a phenomenal.
Since May,
Since May.
the current price, we were up to, I believe, $98.
Oh my goodness.
But
Holy
when
cow.
you remember what it's doing,
Right. Can you put a price on it?
it's irrelevant.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? That's an
exactly.
absolute lifesaver
Exactly.
right there.
And there's a demand.
And there's a demand
there's
for
a-
it
there's
too.
a demand,
And,
so.
I did want, everyone to know that it's administered very non-invasively too.
Yeah, right, that's all
I
it is.
mean,
And this is the medicine.
You know what? One thing we cannot do today, we
Can't
have an
open it.
actual one, not a tester.
Right.
Okay.
So I
you
am
can't-
concerned
yeah.
about breaking the seal on
Yeah,
anything.
so we
Yeah.
can't do that.
But it's a very simple
Procedure.
procedure. It's a nasal
Spray,
inhalant.
yeah.
We spray it into the person's nose, and the counter effects of it
Yep.
are immediate.
Wow, that's
Absolutely
amazing.
immediate.
That is amazing. Now,
So-
when you go to treat someone who has unfortunately fallen into an overdose situation, what kind of drugs do you have to be, very specific about what kind of drug they have overdosed on, or how do you know this? I
Well,
mean, what?
Narcan will do no harm. That's one of the beauties of it.
Oh, okay.
So what this does is it's an inhibitor that inhibits the effects of the opiate on your nervous system. So if we found that it was in fact not an opiate overdose, Narcan isn't going to hurt you anyway.
Wow, this is the beauty of it, isn't it?
It really is.
That's
It's
really
a wonderful thing to have.
So in other words, you don't have to be a scientist on
We
the
had a
scene.
situation just last Saturday night it was called in 911 of an erratic operator on Solomon Pond Road. The gentleman had hit 5 parked cars in a parking
Oh,
lot.
my Lord.
And then hit a tree, continued on, and then was traveling in the wrong lane on Solomon Pond Road. There were several witnesses to this, and he crashed his car and totaled it. And when our officers, including myself, got there, it was pretty obvious that he was under the influence of some type of drug, very erratic behavior. And we were fortunate enough to be there quickly, realized that he was in need of medical attention, and called our paramedics who did administer Narcan. It was pretty obvious that there was some sort of overdose taking place.
Wow.
And he survived, and he eventually, after he was discharged from the hospital, he had criminal charges he was facing. But just to think that this was at 10 o'clock at night on a Saturday, and the gentleman...
Could have been a tragedy involved.
Yeah, absolutely could have been.
Real
It could have been
tragedy.
some innocent people that could have got hurt that night. But in that situation, that was Narcan was applied
And not
to
even
the gentleman.
and not even for the fact that he could have lost his own life
It
too.
was the other
Obviously,
people.
Oh,
if
indeed.
we didn't have that in place, the tool, as you say, in place,
Right.
it's really amazing what that. I have heard of that, and when the chief and I were talking about that, was amazing to me that we had this in our community and we were able to use it on a sustained basis, which is really that's a blessing. It
An
really is.
interesting thing about that is, despite the fact that the gentleman was very, very difficult to deal with, flailing about, struggling with the officers, etc. After the Narcan was administered, shortly after, he was looking around calmly, wondering, well, what happened?
What was going
That
on?
type of thing.
So that's a lifesaver in many
It really is.
instances, and we can almost make the analogy with the defibrillator too, because years ago that was not even
you're right.
a consideration.
Sure.
People
You're right.
were dying routinely of heart attacks. I know my own brother-in-law passed away from that, and if he had had a defibrillator, he probably would have lived. But the only thing that I guess we can say being in the public eye, and you guys are in the public eye, is it really, how many times do we have to put it out there to people before they understand the severity of the problem? I mean, you're in the public eye, you understand on a day-to-day basis because you're in the trenches, and so is the chief. What does it take to get through to people how dangerous it is to inhale or ingest or get hooked on an opiate? Tell us, Chief.
When we sat and spoke before today's show, I made a comment to you, and it's something I feel very strongly about, and that is that we're not going to arrest our way out of this problem.
Exactly.
Okay? This goes far beyond being a law enforcement problem. It's a community problem. It's a public health problem. And it's something that everyone needs to come together and work to address.
That's right.
That said, everybody has limits to what they can do, but if we can fit together, many different pieces of the puzzle, we can make an impact. In terms of, why do people abuse drugs? Well, Brian and I, if we could figure that out, we'd probably be making an awful lot of money working in some think tank. This is not something that just erupted recently, and the abuse of different forms of medications has been around as long as medications have been around. And this is just the most current cycle because it has such tragic and dramatic results that it's getting the attention of a lot of folks, and that's a good thing. Drugs in the community, nothing new. Nothing new. Do we have a drug problem in Northborough? No, we do not have a drug problem in Northborough. We sure have a drug concern in Northborough. Every community does. There's no two ways around that. And I think the worst thing we can do is think that we live in a bubble and that those things don't come here. The Maine South region of Worcester is kind of an open air drug market at times. Well, how long does it take to drive from Northborough to Maine South?
Exactly.
Or to, into the city of Marlborough, into Framingham. We're surrounded by areas where these things are available. The big thing is, what are we going to do about it? So we try to start young with DARE. We try to build a relationship as we go along. We're fortunate to have a full-time resource officer here at Algonquin Regional High School.
That's wonderful.
I am,
really.
and
Yeah.
of course, another one of those wonderful things in Brian's resume is that before taking over as the supervisor of the Detective Bureau, he spent time in the halls of the school, and he gets to know the kids. And I can't stress enough the importance of resource officers in our schools, certainly from the middle school age forward.
Absolutely.
Because there are things that we as experienced and trained police officers see in a different way than educators will view them. Again, we're not there to play teacher. That's not our role. Our role is to support a very important portion of our community, a very important clientele that is very much at risk. We have a lot of kids, and when we talk about this, at times we have a lot of kids with too much money in their pockets.
Yeah. We didn't, like we talked about before, we were lucky if we had 2 nickels to rub together.
That's a problem.
Not
Yeah.
just to
That's-
quote an old cliche,
you know,
but that's the truth.
It is a problem. And, I'm not even going to begin to go into the bigger picture of, where has the internet brought us? And
Oh,
where,
I know. We
it's-
can talk
you
about
can
that a
spend
whole.
Who cares?
That's
What-
like a Pandora box.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what matters is that when someone is in crisis and is having an overdose, that we can get to somebody quickly and we can do something about it
Right.
and save a life. And then hope that the addiction professionals can take over from that point and help that person deal with their disease. And that's the other part of this that people need to embrace. We're talking about a disease. And we don't like to talk about substance abuse problems as a disease.
Right.
We don't like to talk about mental health issues as a disease. There's this stigma to things.
Right.
And, while we sit around and debate stigma, people die.
That's
People
true.
are in crisis. Families are in crisis and in turmoil. And
Look what it does to a family.
Oh, it's
It
incredible.
destroys families. Any
It's
kind of
absolutely incredible.
addiction destroys family. And we could talk about addiction until the cows come home.
Absolutely.
But, for pertaining to what we're discussing today, the tide has to, we have to stem the tide of the drugs. Whether that be, and we had talked about this, making sure your house doesn't have drugs that can be bartered for, sold.
Yeah, and I think
Or
that does
gone to a party and brought to a party. It really has to come from the home
It
too.
absolutely
These
does.
drugs, and I'm sure you've
Yeah,
gone through this,
and
haven't you?
when we have when we offer programs for parents, we occasionally once a year or every other year we'll put on a drug awareness program for parents, just signs to look for. And I bring in drug paraphernalia to say, hey, this is what people are using today, and
Wow.
and that's helpful. But
Wow.
I always tell one
Okay.
of my advice to parents is be nosy.
Exactly.
It's your home. You can enter any room in your home. You can look through your son or daughter's backpack and know their friends. I think that's really critical. Is you're in charge of your
Good
house
point.
still, and
Good point.
know what's going on inside your own house,
Mm-hmm.
and know who your child is associating with.
Exactly.
When they get up to Algonquin, it's a little different because suddenly, at one point you were just a Northborough student hanging out with Northborough friends, and then you get up here and there's, now you introduce another town. So now it's
right.
up to the parents to, venture out a little bit and getting to know their son or daughter's Southborough friends and their parents.
Exactly.
So I really think that's key, and it goes back to communication with the child, where maybe some parents want to keep the child's bedroom door shut. I'd advise keep it open a little bit, and a kid's network today is a lot bigger than it was when I
that's
was
what
growing
we
up.
were-
When I was
we were
growing up
gonna
in
talk
town, it
about.
was simply the only people I knew were people from Northborough. And then eventually Southborough. Today, that's not the case,
That's true.
because not to bring in the social media aspect, but
But
between
it's a dangerous tool
social
in the
media,
wrong hands.
text,
It is.
text messaging, everything's easier to communicate. Before, again, it was you either had to go to a payphone or ride your bike to someone's house, or if you were gonna purchase some drugs, it was a bigger effort.
Exactly.
Now it's not so much the effort, it's very easy to get drugs to be either brought into our town or go to another town and get them.
Now,
It's a simple text message away.
That's really dangerous.
It is,
It's
yeah.
it's a scary world, because these kids, and we're not just, talking about kids here,
Right.
people in general, they can get what they want.
Very
I mean,
easily.
it's much easier in this day and age than it was years ago. But one of the things that I think that we're coming to the end of our program, but I think one of the things that I want to thank both of you for is that there are some topics that people really don't want to hear about. It's kind of uncomfortable. And drugs and the abuse of drugs, especially with your neighbor or your child or a student that you teach, it's an uncomfortable feeling.
It's a terrible thing.
It's
in
a
lot
terrible.
Of ways.
It's
And
terrible.
People need to remember that drug abuse is not a result of bad parenting. Okay,
That's a
there
good point, Chief.
there are folks who just have traits that lend itself towards addiction in whatever it is, but it's not a result of bad parenting. It's not a result of your socioeconomic status. It's not a result of if you have one parent or two living in the home, or where you live. Those things are irrelevant. And sometimes people tend to stigmatize them in that result.
You kind of stereotype it, yeah.
I've been in homes that were dirt poor and filthy rich, and had the problem.
Same
in both.
problems.
It doesn't
Similar
make a
problems.
bit of
Not
difference.
everybody's problems are the same, but
But one
similar.
of the things, before we wrap up, that's real important is, so what do people do if they're in trouble? And as much as, sometimes you'll put out something on the bottom of the screen that'll say to call here, that type of thing. I just want to leave one very simple number with people as a starting place in your journey to look for help for addictions. And that's to start with 211, the Massachusetts 211 program. And it's amazing the amount of information that's available to you by calling 211. And if you have a chance, look up mass211.org and take a look at their services. But a very important one for people to remember, if they have a loved one who appears to be having substance abuse issues, is the Massachusetts Substance Abuse Information and Education Helpline. And their website is helpline-online.com. And these folks can help guide you to professionals in your area. They can help show you resources available in your area. And those types of things are important. If you think your child has a problem, don't overlook it. Don't assume it will go away, okay? Because it's not going to. And I think Brian, I'd love to have you talk about a conversation you had with a young man this morning who is dealing with these problems right now, and the advice that he had to offer to other kids.
Yeah, so we were talking about families in crisis, and that's something that we deal with all the time, unfortunately. And I think people would be surprised in our town how often we do deal with that, whether it's alcohol abuse or substance abuse or domestic violence. We help people with their problems. And more often, within the last couple of years, the heroin has been brought to our attention as being a problem, and families here in our own town dealing with it, a loved one in their family abusing it. And just today, I dealt with a family in crisis, and they got some help through the court system, which is another route. It's usually sometimes a last resort.
Yeah.
You don't want to force your child down that route, but it is. They were trying to save their child, essentially. So we assist in that,
Process.
in that process.
Yeah.
And as I was speaking with this individual who I knew, I had in health classes here at Algonquin a number of years ago, I said, "What would you tell a 16-year-old kid today?"
Wow.
He said, "Just don't try it the first time." He goes, "Just don't try it." And And he meant it, you know. This was a kid,
The best
his
advice.
process, and when I do have an opportunity, I like to talk to people and find out about their struggles. Most of them are not bad people.
No.
They're addicted, and we have to look at that. So I like talking to them and finding out, how did you get from
here to there.
growing up in this nice community to sticking a needle in your arm,
Right.
and a nice family, really good families. How did that happen? And for most of these younger people, and I said younger, usually early to mid-20s, that's a popular age that we're dealing with the opiate
Yes,
stuff.
that's
It
true.
started out with, well, I started drinking a little bit in the 8th grade, or smoking cigarettes. And then when I got to high school, I started drinking a little bit at some parties, alcohol. And then I started smoking marijuana. And then someone introduced me to pills. So I started doing that. And then that just wasn't enough.
Yeah.
And so it built. But he said, yeah, just tell them,
Don't do
just
it.
don't do it the first time. He goes, there's nothing good that comes of it. And and I wish that individual well,
Well,
because I think he has a very promising life
Well,
ahead
that's
of him, and
nice
I
to
hope he
know.
gets the
At
help.
least he's getting the help he needs. And the advice he gave was really so prophetic and so poignant at the same time, because it's such a good, it's a good advice. It's good advice to give anybody. But before we leave, I just want to say a couple of words about, I guess, Chief, you were so right and right on with you. We can't arrest our way out of this problem, and we can't legislate morality, but we certainly can have compassion and understanding and try to reach our young people wherever we can get them, whether it be in the 1st grade, the middle school, 5th grade up to high school, and even beyond, maybe, and others as well, people to be educated in the aspect of what to take as far as pain management is concerned, how much to take, and how long to take it, and be aware of what's in your cabinet, your medicine cabinet, and how easy it is for people to get at that, either steal it or what have you, and understand that it's a problem that is very, very close to us, and we need to have faith that we can do whatever our wonderful tools that we have, do whatever we can to try to mitigate the problem. And I want to thank again Detective Brian Griffin for coming, and Police Chief Mark Leahy for being our guests today. And thank you for coming and sharing this very important discussion about opiate abuse. Thank you, and goodbye for now.